Investigations continue into the fires that wreaked havoc on the slopes of Table Mountain and parts of the UCT precinct. A number of factors are likely to have caused the blaze. People living on the mountain are concerned, and authorities moved swiftly to arrest one of them. But other major factors, including the weather and highly flammable alien plant species, are factors as well. I'm joined now from Cape Town via Skype by Dr. NICOLA van Wilgen-Bredenkamp, a global change scientist from SANParks. Now, her research focuses on the impact and management of climate change and alien species. NICOLA, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I think, could we start with the story at hand, which obviously is this blaze on Table Mountain, large parts of Table Mountain National Park. From what I've read, and I'm no expert, it looks like it was a very dangerous cocktail that came together on that day, including unseasonably hot weather, I've read somewhere, where some were reporting temperatures up to 17 degrees higher than average for that time of year, it being autumn, of course. From where you stand, and we understand investigations are ongoing, talk to us about some of those factors that all added to this cocktail that led to this blaze starting last Sunday.
Yes, so basically you need three things for a fire. You need an ignition, then you need weather conditions that are conducive for fire, and then you need fuel to burn. And those weather conditions that we had on Sunday, as you've mentioned, were in places up to 17 degrees higher than the average for April. And I've been doing quite a bit of research into climate change, and we know that the temperature in Cape Town over the last century has risen by almost 2 degrees. And 2 degrees doesn't sound like a lot, but what this actually means is that your number of extremely hot days increases dramatically. So we have more and more opportunity for conditions that are conducive for wildfires.
Now, 2 degrees it might sound like a little, but it is massive if you look at how climate change has slowly and now faster had an impact on these kinds of things. We saw it in Australia with their wildfires that they have almost like clockwork every year as well. But what about the human element here? We saw an arrest taking place immediately almost after that fire was brought under control. Vagrants, of course, front and center again being blamed for their part in this fire. Is there a right and wrong here?
So, I mean, I think it's natural to look for somebody to blame, but it's really very unhelpful. We know, not just from South Africa and Table Mountain National Park, where we know that people are responsible for starting most of our fires. It's the same in Australia. It's the same in California. Over 80% of fires are started by people. The fact that we live so close to a fire-prone environment and that we have nearly 5 million people in Cape Town means that there are going to be lots of ignition sources. And I think, you know, we have a multitude of socioeconomic problems that have been really made much worse by this pandemic. And your heart has to go out for homeless people. I mean, it could happen to any one of us in current circumstances. So we really need to think of more constructive ways of dealing with our societal problems. Where there are people, there will be fire. That's inevitable. And I think one thing we can do is increase the awareness around fire and the dangers around starting fire. I think that's one thing that's come out really strongly, is that everybody that uses the mountain needs to know quite how dangerous it is to play with fire. We're taught from small about that, but it really is critical.
Now, SANParks has the very difficult task of managing important factors like alien vegetation in a space like Table Mountain National Park. How difficult is that job, and how important is it when it comes to fire management in an urban park like Table Mountain National Park?
So managing fuel is one of the things that we can actually do, because that's the third component that you need for a fire to be carried. And Table Mountain National Park has actually done phenomenally well in clearing alien species. We've cleared over 113,000 hectares of aliens in the last 10 years. And it's actually one of the processes where we're working really well with the science management interface, having really good scientific evidence base for how we prioritize our clearing. But it is really critical, because fynbos does need to burn, but many of our alien species are also stimulated by fire. and they can become incredibly dense. And so where there are alien species, there's a very high fuel load, and that means that the risk of wildfire becoming very out of control is much worse where you have dense stands of alien species. So that really is a core component of our fire management, and something that we've actually been doing reasonably well at over the last 10 years or so.
Do you think that there's enough of an understanding from ordinary folks like myself? We're not scientists like you, do not spend our time focused on conservation and spaces like Table Mountain National Park. Do you think there's enough of an understanding of why it's important to clear alien vegetation and why controlled burns are key? Because many of us would say, no, don't burn down the trees. And then you've got scientists such as yourself who needs to explain, but not all trees are good depending on where they are found.
So, yeah, there's a number of components to that question. And I think one of the key challenges that we have is we talk about this urban wildland interface, and managing fuel on that interface is incredibly tricky. And communicating the dangers and the risks with individual homeowners is something that remains a challenge, and it's not particularly legislated anywhere. But I think not just in South Africa, all over the world where you have fire-prone environments, you have this tension, and there's a constant trade-off between safety, ecological concerns, legal concerns, feasibility of actually carrying a fire. And I think what people need to realize is that having prescribed burns under mild conditions where you can control a fire is incredibly valuable. It helps prevent the risk of out-of-control wildfires, and it also stimulates regeneration of our fynbos species, which, although they are flammable, don't occur so densely as what happens when you've got stands of alien species. So using prescribed burns is one of the key things that we need to do in order to manage fire properly. And one of the big challenges that we face is that the current wildfire legislation is very risk averse. And so you have to almost jump through 1,000 hoops simultaneously to get a day where you can burn safely and you've notified everybody and ticked all the boxes. And I think that's one thing that we could look at going forward, is how we can better manage this urban wildland interface in a way that allows us to conduct those prescribed burns and create a safer fire environment. Obviously, then there's also things that people living on the urban side can do, and that is one of the critical areas where we need to raise awareness. Things like cleaning your gutters, making sure that you don't have big, highly flammable trees close to buildings. Along that urban interface, as I've said, it's critically important that we keep that fuel load low, because we've seen that these invasive species and even, some other highly flammable species where you've got tall trees, if they go up in flames, they can send sparks quite some distance away. And if that spark lands in a gutter that's filled with highly flammable dry grass or something, then your home is at risk.
Indeed, important learnings there, and indeed a need for much more education around this subject matter. Thank you so much, Dr. NICOLA van Wilgen Bredenkamp. She is a global change scientist with SANParks.